Welcome to the Animal Wellness Podcast, all about improving the lives of animals with better policies and practices in government and business. Brought to you by Animal Wellness Action, where we believe helping animals helps us all. Here's your host, Joseph Grove.
Greetings, everyone, and welcome to the show. I'm Joseph Grove. Today, we're going to be talking about bird flu. Several headlines have likely made it into your news feed recently, but if you're like most folks, you haven't paid much attention to them. Election news, the holidays, Winter Storm Blair, big stuff. So you're probably not paying attention to bird flu. But even though it's been in the background noise, odds are you as a grocery shopper are at least a little familiar with its consequences. As of this month, the United States has culled approximately 130 million poultry, including chickens and turkeys, to control the spread of highly pathogenic avian influenza, HPAI. This outbreak has significantly impacted egg supplies, leading to record high prices. In December, wholesale prices for large eggs in the Midwest reached $5.57 per dozen, a 150% increase from the previous year, with California prices peaking at about $8.85 per dozen. About a year ago, bird flu made the leap into cattle, and according to a December story in the Des Moines Register, the virus shows no sign of slowing. Reporter Amy Maxman wrote, the U.S. government failed to eliminate the virus on dairy farms when it was confined to a handful of states by quickly identifying infected cows and taking measures to keep their infections from spreading. Now, at least 875 herds across 16 states, including Iowa, have tested positive. The USDA announced in December a federal order to test milk nationwide. The reporter quotes Tom Bulkey, director of the Global Health Program, as saying, it's disheartening to see so many of the same failures that emerged during the COVID-19 crisis reemerge. Okay, bad enough. Monitoring the overall health of America's farm animals is certainly an animal welfare issue. When birds are killed en masse owing to these outbreaks, the methods used are ghastly. Either the operators turn off the ventilation and let heat and oxygen deprivation kill the birds, or they use foam used in firefighting that essentially suffocates the birds. But a larger concern is that the next large-scale infection may be among people. More than 60 people in the United States, including one recently in Iowa, have been infected, mainly by cows or poultry, but cases could skyrocket if the virus evolves to spread efficiently from person to person. And the recent news that a person in Louisiana was killed by the bird flu shows that the virus can be dangerous. Just a few mutations could allow the bird flu to spread between people. Because viruses mutate within human and animal bodies, each infection, the reporter wrote, is like a pull of a slot machine lever. Tom Peacock, a bird flu researcher at the Pirbright Institute in the United Kingdom, said, even if there's only a 5% chance of a bird flu pandemic happening, we're talking about a pandemic that probably looks like 2020 or worse. The U.S. knows the risk, but hasn't done anything to slow this down, he said. So, the genie may be out of the bottle when it comes to farm animals, and although humans have been relatively lucky so far, there's no guarantee that that luck will hold. Here to talk about bird flu are Drs. Jim Keene and Tom Poole, two scientists and veterinarians on staff at Animal Wellness Action and the Center for a Humane Economy. Dr. Keene earned his veterinary medicine and epidemiology doctorate degrees from the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign. He was a senior veterinary researcher focused on livestock and zoonotic infections with the USDA Agricultural Research Service in Nebraska for 15 years. Later, he was on the faculty at University of Nebraska-Lincoln School of Veterinary Medicine for 13 years. His specific expertise is emerging and zoonotic infectious diseases of farm animals. He has broad field experience in outbreak investigation and animal disease control, including enteric zoonotic bacteria from livestock in the U.S., foot and mouth disease in the United Kingdom, and African swine fever in the Caucasus. Dr. Poole earned his master's in public health, tropical medicine degree from Harvard University, and his doctorate of veterinary medicine degree from Oklahoma State University. He is a 30-year diplomat of the American College of Veterinary Preventive Medicine. He spent 26 years in the U.S. Army and served as commander of the U.S. Army Veterinary Command a worldwide tri-service organization, a tri-service command. Earlier, he worked in the U.S. Army Medical Research and Development Command Center, writing peer-reviewed publications on leptospirosis and dengue hemorrhagic fever. Upon retirement as a full colonel from the Army, Dr. Poole served as the territorial veterinarian for Guam for 17 years, and he continues to serve as adjunct professor for the University of Guam. So these gentlemen know what they are talking about. So when they speak on these issues, they are not mouthpieces for a point of view. They bring real scientific, hard-earned, on-the-ground experience dealing with these severe issues. And as we've been talking about in Animal Wellness Action for quite a while now, bird flu is something to be taken seriously. And sadly, we are being proven right, as evidenced by the fatality in Louisiana. And that slot machine reference really, really gets to me. Dr. Poole, everything I said, how do you respond to that? Are we saying the sky is falling?
I think you're absolutely right. This disease absolutely terrifies me. And I would just like to define zoonotics so everybody knows what that, probably most everyone does, but it is an animal disease that is shared by humans. And about 65% of all human diseases were originally animal diseases, and about 75% of all new diseases are of animal origin. And influenza was certainly one of those. It was not originally a human disease. We know humans didn't have it until sometime in the last 10,000 years. Those North Asians that migrated into the Americas, they had not seen influenza yet. Probably no humans had seen influenza yet. And we hadn't started domesticating poultry yet until the end of the last ice age, when the oceans rose and the land bridge closed to Asia. So those people were never exposed, but the rest of the world was. And of course, they introduced influenza into the Americas, but with devastating results. Everyone else had 8 or 10,000 years of herd immunity with human influenza, whereas the Native Americans had not. So this is very much a poultry disease. They've probably had it for millions of years, and now humans have had it for 6, 8, 10,000 years. Not really sure how long. But we have sort of gotten used to it, and we have several different types of human influenza, and they are all very highly infectious, but fairly low pathogenicity. And we're all familiar with it. We've all had influenza. This H5N1 is a very highly pathogenic influenza, and it is a poultry disease, but it has now shown the ability to jump into humans. Fortunately, it hasn't gone from human to human yet. But there's been about 950 people over the last few years, mostly Asian poultry workers, that have contracted H5N1. And that mortality rate is about 50%. And this virus, unlike COVID, which was focusing on old, sick people, this disease is hardest on younger, healthier people. So the people that are, 25 to 50, those are the ones that have good, strong immune systems. And this disease turns your own immune system against you.
I want to highlight that, right? Because the healthier you are, the better your immune system, it seems to me, the greater weaponry this disease has to wield against you.
That's correct. And so, and that's what makes this particularly worrisome. If this thing were to reassort, and that is, if a person were to be infected with human influenza at the same time they were infected with H5N1, let's say they are a dairy worker or a poultry farm worker, and they were to end up with both infections at the same time, then if just quickly, just a little virus background in that viruses, unlike bacteria, one of the test questions I love to ask my students is, can a virus multiply in warm potato salad? And they're so anxious to say yes. Well, of course, because we know how dangerous warm potato salad is. But no, viruses have to have living cells. A virus really isn't truly alive. A virus is just a little message that says make more message. But it has to hijack cellular machinery in order to reproduce itself. And so that's why if we were to have one cell in one person's body infected with both of these viruses, then that cellular machinery might have the ability, would definitely have the ability to mix those RNA fragments and come up with a new virus that would have some or all of the transmissibility of human influenza and some or all of the pathogenicity of H5 avian influenza.
What is pathogenicity?
Another word for that is virulence, but it means how severe the disease is. And so human influenza generally is low severity, low pathogenicity. We still lose 30 to 50,000 Americans every year to influenza. And again, it's usually older, weaker people. And once again, that's where this one's going to be different. But this actually happened to us once before. We had a swine flu variant in 2009. It killed about 18,000 Americans, but they were young. That particular strain was like H5N1 in that it focused on, it turned your own immune system against you, and you would have these cytokine storms and you would sort of auto-digest your own lungs. So it was right after the Obama inauguration, and everybody was happy and busy and not focusing on that thing. But that thing quietly killed 18,000 young Americans that aren't normally the kind of people that die of influenza. Anyway, this would be on a much grander scale than that if this thing were to reassort. And in every case that we know of, when one of these influenza viruses has been able to jump into humans, it has resulted in a pandemic. The first one that we knew about, or at least in modern times, was in 1917, when the Spanish flu ended up killing between 50 and 100 million people around the world. And it was exacerbated by World War I. We had all these people packed into trenches and on troop ships and that sort of thing. But that did that with a 2.5% mortality rate. That killed 50 to 100 million people. This thing is having a 50% mortality rate, with the very best hospitals focusing on one patient. If you were to take those good hospitals and give them 100 or 1,000 patients, it's not going to be a 50% mortality rate. It's going to be a 90, 95% mortality rate. It's going to be unbelievable if this happens. So I know I've already spoken too long, Joseph, but I think it's impossible to exaggerate the potential of this thing. It is simply impossible to exaggerate. This has the potential to end civilization as we know it.
Well, you certainly can't get a bolder face headline than that. So just thinking of, again, what you talk about, the mutations, right? So I'm kind of imagining the movie The Fly with Jeff Goldblum and Gina Davis, right? Where you have this device, indeed, where you have this device, and let's say that device is a bird or a cow or even a human being, right? So into this animal, you put in Jeff Goldblum and you put in the fly, and then they get mixed up and something absolutely nightmarish emerges. Is that roughly the way our audience can visualize the potential here?
That's an excellent analogy, and I'm glad I thought of it. I'll use that because that actually is pretty close to what happens. Yeah. You could think of his machine as being that one cell, and that it just takes one cell that is mixing the pieces of this thing and making a new virus. And that's what happens with reassortment. And that is what is much more likely to happen than an actual mutation, because mutations are usually just like one or two, nucleotides or something. Whereas in order to the pathogenicity of this thing, the virulence of this thing, that's probably going to be a few hundred base pairs and so it would be a whole section of that RNA that needs to come out and go over. Or the transmissibility, the other way, that transmissibility is probably a lot of base pairs that are going to have to, and so that's how you get reassortment rather than mutation that results in these pandemics.
Tell me a little bit more about this 13-year-old girl in Canada. You mentioned some of that before we got on to the recording, but that sounds awful. Talk about her and what happened to her. It
was really awful. This was a young girl. She had some health problems. Her BMI index was said to be above 35. So she's pretty overweight, pretty substantially overweight. She also had asthma. And she got sick in mid-November and went and saw the doctor, and she had conjunctivitis and runny nose and that sort of thing. And so he put her on Tamiflu, which is an antiviral, and she got quite a lot worse. and came back in, and they put her on 2 other antivirals, and she continued to worsen until they were only able to keep her alive. They first put her on they intubated her and were putting her on the respirator to force her to breathe, and that wasn't getting it done. So then they finally had to do what's called ECMO, the extracorporeal membrane oxygenation. And that's where they punch through your chest into the right atrium of your heart and start sucking blood out of that. And they run it through a machine to warm and oxygenate that blood. And then they send it back in through your femoral vein. That's maybe the most common way. There's different ways you can do it. But anyway, it is a very invasive, a last ditch effort, and only about half the people that get that survive. But this little girl did survive. But that's what it took to save that one little girl. And
it turned out that it was bird flu, right? I mean,
yes.
That's what they ultimately determined she had.
She did. And she didn't have any poultry exposure that is known. So they think she probably got it from wild birds. And this virus is fairly tough. It can survive about 4 months in like moist soil. If it's cool and moist, it can survive a long time. On dry surfaces and that sort of thing, it's just minutes, maybe an hour at the most. So it's not going to survive a long time that way. And people really don't have to worry, about consuming eggs and consuming poultry and that sort of thing. This thing doesn't survive pasteurization temperatures. It doesn't survive cooking. You don't have to worry about that. What you have to worry about is what's happening at the farms. That's where this thing could kill us. The fact that we haven't been getting, in my opinion, a very professional response from USDA in managing this over the last 3 years. And I know it's easy to sit on the sidelines and criticize, but the stakes just couldn't be any higher for this thing. I mean, even if we didn't have the disease potential, which we absolutely do, just the economic impact that this thing has made is just dramatic. And there've been some difficult things said about USDA, and I think some of those are deserved. There's an excellent article in Vanity Fair a couple of months ago talking about going and interviewing these people, and that it's Catherine Eban was the author of that article, and she talked to several veterinarians who had been fired because they refused to declare farms safe that were actually unsafe, or they were requesting additional testing, and the dairy farms didn't want to do it. And the USDA, according to Ms. Eban, had a sort of a don't test, don't tell policy. Well, that has not served us well at all. And Dr. Keene is really better qualified to address that part.
Tom, thank you for that. And I will go to Dr. Keene in a moment to talk more about the USDA and the official government response. But before we leave this part of it, the treatment of this girl in Canada with Tamiflu, I assume that drug was designed, as perhaps subsequent ones were, to bolster her immune system.
Not exactly, Joseph. No, but what it really does is it tries to prevent viral replication. So it tries to prevent, and there's a lot of different ways of doing that. A virus infects a cell and hijacks that cell, and whatever, the cell is normally making all kinds of things that the cell needs. And the virus goes in there and says, you're not making anything anymore except virus. And so that cell starts making virus, and it does it different ways. Sometimes the cell just fills with virus until it explodes and virus all spreads everywhere. Other times it actually makes the little packages and sequentially releases the virus. That's sort of how, COVID works and that sort of thing. But anyway, what these things do is they go in there and screw up the various, transcription and, copying and that sort of thing of this virus. But so it's not really an immune system thing specifically.
So was the bird flu just stronger than these drugs? Why wouldn't these antiviral drugs have worked against bird flu in this girl?
The problem is that with viruses, you're talking about billions of particles. And so these things have a way, just like bacteria do, they have a way of just with dumb luck of navigating around whatever your thing is. And so whenever you use these antivirals, they usually work great for a little bit. And then the viruses all figure out how to navigate around them accidentally. It's just dumb luck, but they dumb luck and figure out a way around it. And then the only ones that survive are the ones that have that ability. So then pretty soon your whole population has the ability to defeat Tamiflu or sequentially whatever you use. So these antivirals usually don't ever last for very long, in a particular outbreak.
Should the virus become human friendly, to put it ironically, what would be the primary means of transmissibility? Would it be respiratory? Would we breathe it in like we did COVID?
Yeah, it's going to be just like regular influenza. It's going to be the same way. It's going to be, droplets, but again, it can also be hand contact and those sorts of things, but those require pretty quick. You cough in your hand, shake somebody's hands, and they wipe their eye or something. It's got to be fairly quick. Those viruses don't survive very long if it's not a moist environment. Nose, your eyes are two really good ways. You can do it orally also. And so all of these things, there was a great Japanese study that I saw a few years ago where this guy took people and tested them, and they had influenza. And then he put this big clear glass panel, and had them talk to each other for 15 minutes. And everybody did that. And then another group, and they were coughing and doing whatever. And one person was negative. The other was positive. We have lots of these people. And then they would have them, every 60 seconds, they would shake hands. They'd reach around the barrier and shake hands like that. Well, the people that were shaking hands had a much, much higher transmission rate than the people that were just talking. And he also did it without the barrier. So the barrier reduced it, but by far the highest transmission was from the handshaking.
Interesting. All right. Well, when COVID was a thing, I didn't worry so much about that. So I'm learning a little bit here. And in fact, I ascribe to the fact that I never got COVID to my wearing glasses, because I assumed that those shielded me from the virus getting my eyes. So,
well, you could be right. I only got it once, and everybody else I know got it multiple times. So.
Animal wellness action depends on people like you to complete our work. Our recent victories to protect big cats, spare beagles from pharmaceutical tests, and convince Nike to stop killing kangaroos for shoes would not have happened without the financial support of our donors. Become one at any amount. Visit animalwellnessaction.org/donate to join our fight against animal cruelty of all kinds. That's animalwellnessaction.org/donate.
And I do want to talk to Dr. Keene, who used to work very intimately with the USDA, about its response. And some of what Dr. Poole was saying about the Vanity Fair article, I'll put a link to that in the show notes, is concerning. And I know even when we had COVID and we were worried about zoonotic transmission from mink, the USDA kept silent an outbreak of zoonotic mutation within mink to humans, right? There were a number of people infected in Michigan who got a new variant of COVID that apparently had been cooked up inside of a mink. Nothing much happened there. And then if we're talking about the zoonotic link between COVID and humans and drawing a parallel to the potential for bird flu, we know coronavirus came from China, wet markets, the live animal markets, or a lot of people believe increasingly perhaps from a lab, but it was an animal lab, and that might thereby have been a zoonotic point of confabulation. It's not the right word, but where it came from.
Good word, though.
It's a good word. It's a good word, and I hope people listening to it don't know what it means so that I can get the credit for using a word. My wife busts me on this all the time. I will use a word, and she'll say, "I don't think that means what you think it means." And she's usually right. So Dr. Keene, what's up with the USDA? Why are they not taking more seriously, it appears, these issues and protecting Americans from disease?
Well, like Tom said, I don't want to necessarily just throw stones at USDA because, as Tom said, this virus, it's a tough bird, so to speak. It's different, something now, either because of the biology of the virus or because of the poor response of regulatory agencies charged with disease control. It's hard to control because this virus is spread around the world, starting in China, as Tom said, in I think 96, 97. And then it slowly spread through Asia and then Africa and then Western Europe. And it finally got here. It took it got here in 2022. So it took a long time to get here. And there was a combination of people moving, poultry, and then bird migrations, probably mostly through bird migrations. And along the way, that virus has mutated just like COVID thousands of times. So if you looked at a map of all the genealogy sequence of the virus, you'd have thousands of variants. And the one that got to the U.S., when it got here, it was different. It behaved differently. Than previous versions. And for example, and it keeps involved. For example, the version of the virus that infected dairy cattle, it's different from the ones it evolved and adapted to cattle. So it's very good at, I don't know if chameleon-like is the right word, but when it gets to a new host, it adapts, make changes to allow it to reproduce. As Tom said, its goal is just to make more of itself. It doesn't care where it's at, and it'll find a way when it gets into a new host. So I'm kind of giving some credit to the virus, but also, USDA, I think okay. First of all, bird flu, there's two diseases, probably worldwide, the most important diseases economically. And that's bird flu and virulent Newcastle disease. And they're both of those diseases, the highly pathogenic bird flu and the very virulent Newcastle disease, because there's mild and severe versions of both diseases. And then neither one is normally present in the U.S. or certainly not present in our poultry. But around the world, so whenever that, and so I don't know how many times we've had bird flu, a highly pathogenic bird flu. Let's say 10 times. In the last 30 years, we've had about 15 times where Newcastle disease has got in the States. And the response of USDA is stamping out. Their policy is to kill everything that has it. So that's what they do. And the reason is, it's not for public health reasons that they do that. They do it for economic reasons. And it's part of their language, because, same thing with foot-and-mouth disease in cattle. They're not doing it. Foot-and-mouth disease, by analogy, a little bit different from bird flu. It's not a serious disease. They don't die from it, but it affects trade. You can't sell meat. And similarly, if you have birds, if you're shown to have bird flu, you can't export your product. And that's for poultry is a very small part of the U.S. total poultry market. We consume most of what we grow. But so their whole purpose really is for economic control of the disease, not for public health control. So you got to look at that in their perspective. So that's sort of a constraint that you could say they may have in a way, but so they're almost like they were a robotic response to the disease. And I worked on a Newcastle disease for about 6 weeks in South Central LA back in 2003. That a big, real Newcastle disease, which happened to get over the border. We can digress a little bit here. Newcastle disease is a little bit different. Bird flu comes in through mostly through wild bird migration. Newcastle disease, which looks you can't tell them apart in a chicken. It kills chickens. It looks the same. It's systemic disease that affects the whole bird, but it comes over from smuggled cockfighting birds. And it's happened 10 of the 15 times it's got in as from cockfighting birds. So it's a little bit different in terms of how it gets in compared to bird flu. But the response is to kill, not for domestic reasons primarily, but for international trade. So some analogies, I would say this, when bird flu got in, and USDA had 20 years to prep for it, you could say. It's sort of like a wildfire that got out of control. And certainly that happened a second time with the dairy cattle, because, in their defense with the dairy cattle, I believe it's about 900 herds have been infected. And it's all since about March. So it's real, especially in California. It is a total wildfire in California right now.
Yeah, because, we obviously do a lot of work relative to cockfighting. And one of the things you gentlemen have written about, and Wayne Pasali, our president, has written about, is the connection between bird flu, virulent Newcastle disease, and cockfighting. In fact, I believe it was the case in Thailand where they had actually documented the infections of people in that country and associated them with cockfighting. And I do want to talk about that. They are not killing, however, the cattle. Is that correct? I know when it comes to poultry, they use some of the methods I talked about in my intro, but the dairy or the cattle, they are not calling. Is that correct, Dr. Keene?
Yeah, that's right. And there's about, I think as of a couple of days ago, it was 919 herds, but it's growing exponentially. The number of herds that are infected. And like in parts of California, most livestock, they're clustered. If people who grow swine are all together and people grow dairy all together, it kind of helps to have the industry clustered like that. So, Yeah, so it's about 919 herds, but dairy herds are going to be, they could be 100, they could be 1,000 animals. They haven't told them animals. It's probably somewhere in what I've read and I estimate myself is probably between 500,000 and 1 million cattle have been infected by it because that's herd. They're not giving you the herd number. So it's a lot of animals. And so it's probably, I've never heard any reason why USDA is not killing them, but it's never showed up in cattle before. It's a brand new phenomenon. They probably maybe couldn't afford to do it because cattle are really, really pricey right now. But you have to wonder, okay, so why is the policy to kill birds, but not to kill the dairy cattle? Because of the 66 cases, because the viruses are different, you can tell where the virus came from when a human gets sick. So of the 66 cases, 2/3 have come from dairy cattle workers and 1/3, about 20 people have got infected from poultry workers. Like Tom said, it's livestock workers who have contact who get infected. So, I mean, in a way, USDA is sucking it. I think it's like a wildfire out of control, and maybe going to have enough firefighters. But again, their purpose is really for economic control and that's to keep it from becoming endemic, right? They kill us, so it doesn't become endemic. I think it's too late. It's every continent. It's Antarctica. And it couldn't have been, the disease in terms of poultry could not have been worse, in my opinion, just to leave it alone in hindsight and let natural immunity take care of it. Because usually whenever a new disease shows up, like COVID, I think the mortality was probably highest early on, and then we sort of adapt to it and get better. It's basically the story is something new gets in, nobody's immune to it. And that's what caused a lot of damage, but eventually the host fights back and they come to some kind of a handshake, maybe, like Russia, US, nuclear treaty. Well, we agree not to kill each other, but we still might harm each other a little bit.
Right. Well, and it's certainly not in the interest of the virus to kill its host. Correct.
Exactly. That's why they claim that they claim that a bird flu will kill 100% of poultry. I don't actually believe that. And we never get the chance to know. I don't believe it at all, actually, that's what happens. So that doesn't have, as you said, it's not in the interest of the virus. On the other hand, a lot of the poultry are very inbred for production traits. And so they may be they may have more uniform. If they are susceptible to the virus, they may be more uniform in terms of their, if they are susceptible, it could kill more than it would, say, a wild bird or something like that as more genetic variation.
Right. And I appreciate what you said about the USDA and its mission. Where is the Centers for Disease Control on bird flu? What is that branch or that agency doing?
Well, now Tom may be more, may know about this than I do. As far as the control, they step back and let USDA as far as livestock go. But the one complaint I have heard about USDA, and I think was similar with COVID, that they control the testing. So it's hard to know what's going on. They want to use their preferred diagnostic tests. They don't want state public health labs to do it. Testing for viruses now is very, very easy. High school kids could do it. It's not hard with most of them are PCR tests, which are just, you don't have to grow the virus. Like in the past, you had to grow the virus, which was a lot of work. So, yeah, so I don't know. I think the bureaucracies, they kind of get in their own way sometimes. Or maybe it's more like not their own way. They want to have control. They want to have their own piece of the pie, which also means, of course, corresponding money. But again, the burden has not been huge on CDC or human public health yet.
Well, I think, I say this, and I'm sure it's not original to me, but the only thing we learn from history is that we don't learn anything from history. So it seems to be the case that the lessons we should have learned just 4 short years ago or 5 short years ago now, we have not learned. Let's move to cockfighting, because we do cover that a lot in content from Animal Wellness Action. Wayne Pacelli writes a lot about it. We have fought vigorously to pass the FIGHT Act, and we'll fight more for the FIGHT Act in the new Congress. But the FIGHT Act would help us crack down on cockfighting and dogfighting. But with cockfighting, we have the movement of birds, not only from town to town as these cockfighting derbies occur, where fighters from one state will take their birds to another state, which in essence is a de facto migration of the birds temporarily. They're moved to a new place, introduced to birds from that place, and then those birds go back to where they came from. And then, of course, the nature of cockfighting is such that, well, it's a messy sport, right? You have a lot of blood that the cockfighters come into contact with. We've written about how some cockfighters, if their bird is ailing, will even give the bird mouth to beak. So it seems to me to be, if you're going to talk about a way to spread a disease, cockfighting seems to be the way to do that. And that's one of the reasons we're so ardent that the Fight Act be passed. Dr. Poole, talk about the role of cockfighting as a potential spreader of this disease and why it's so important for the Fight Act to be passed.
Good. Yeah. There's two things really to talk about. One, as you just said, is first, there's cockfighting just has no redeeming features. There is just nothing good about cockfighting. There's nothing you can say, yes, but there's this one good thing about cockfighting. There is nothing. There's nothing good about cockfighting. It's a felony throughout the United States, and for good reasons. This is a horrible, cruel practice. It's dangerous. It causes people to become inured to animal cruelty, which also then transfers into human cruelty. That is very well established. That people that become comfortable with being cruel to animals end up being the wife beaters, that beat their children and that sort of thing. So there's just nothing good about this. It's an activity that is also tied with human trafficking and drugs and every sort of illegal activity. So these are some of the most depraved people in the country, in my opinion. And then they try to wrap themselves in this cloak of agriculture that, well, we're just another branch of agriculture. No, you're not. My family we are 5 generations now of raising cattle humanely, and we have nothing at all in common with you. And we don't want you associating yourselves with what we do for a living at all, because everything they do is all about cruelty and depravity. And they bring children into this thing. So that's one aspect that we can never get away from, is there's just nothing good about this. And then when you talk about the danger from a disease standpoint, that's another thing that's sort of hard to exaggerate, because as you said, they are not bringing these birds forward for examination. They hide them. They don't want them to be tested because, if they test and are positive, then they may be slaughtered. So they refuse to do it. It's this whole underground thing where they're moving these birds surreptitiously, crossing lines. And as you said, they also are having very intimate human contact with poultry, which is the very last thing we want. That's the very last thing we want, with this disease being spread by wild birds. And most poultry operations are doing everything they could do to keep themselves isolated from wild birds because of the disease, not only things like influenza, but salmonella and lots of other things. So these poultry farms go to great lengths with nets and mesh and everything else to keep the wild birds out. Well, the cockfighter birds, they're just out. They just got these little A-frames and every bird's out there. And so they can interact with any kind of wild bird. And then the cockfighter is holding these birds. And as you said, actually sometimes putting the bird's head in their mouths when they're fighting and everything to suck the airway secretions out to supposedly improve that bird's endurance. So they're having very intimate contact with this cockfighter could very easily have human influenza and be handling a bird that has avian influenza. And that was, as I was talking earlier, that is the perfect little, nidus, the beginning of this thing. That could be patient 0, where you have this first new virus made. And once we have this virus, once in one cell and one person, these viruses mix, and then we end up with this highly pathogenic influenza that has the transmissibility of human influenza. Then we have a pandemic that'll make us forget all about COVID. So the one thing that the Fight Act does that I love about that is this industry depends on one thing. It depends on the U.S. Postal Service to ship these birds. And Jim, you just put the numbers out earlier today. Did you say that there was 20 million, was it 10 million that we think estimated cockfighting birds in the United States?
Yeah, well, it's estimated 20 million.
Yeah. So we're talking about a lot of birds. This is a huge industry and it's a terrible industry, but they depend on the U.S. Postal Service to fly these birds all over. And they're just flying the cocks, the males, the roosters is all they're flying around. And so what the FIGHT Act would do was stop the U.S. Postal Service from being able to send adult roosters around. That will cut the heart out of this industry because right now we're depending on law enforcement to enforce these laws. And these are rural areas where these cockfights are held generally. And so we're depending on sheriffs who are always, underfunded, understaffed, and they're out there dealing with these very, very dangerous people. And these sheriffs, they need the votes, they need the support. And so I just think it's completely unfair for us to expect the sheriffs to go out and enforce these laws with these very dangerous people that are now that we have these gangs moving in from, Central and South America, it's becoming even more dangerous. It is too much to expect sheriffs to do that. And so you can sort of skip that really almost. And if we can get the FIGHT Act passed, that one thing it'll do is to stop them from using the Postal Service to ship the birds around. And that's going to pretty much end this, or it's going to really cut the heart out of it anyway.
Sure. And that's a terrific point. I tell people that these birds are just mailed in essence, and they can't believe it. Right. So people in urban areas don't really understand how a lot of this works. It's unfathomable to them that these things occur, and they represent the kind of cruelty and danger to people that you mentioned. So the FIGHT Act is very important. I'll put a link to it in the show notes. And because this is an animal wellness action podcast, I hope every listener will take a couple of minutes and go to that link and let your legislators know that you support the FIGHT Act, because not only will it help on animal cruelty, it will cut down on the danger to humans. Helping animals helps us all is the motto of Animal Wellness Action and the Center for a Humane Economy. This is a perfect example of it. And also the FIGHT Act would give you a private right of action. So if you live next door to a cockfighting arena or someone who raises these birds, you alert law enforcement and they don't follow through, then you can take them to court on your own. It's a key piece of legislation, and I hope everyone will respond to that. It looks like we lost Dr. Keene. Dr. Poole, let me come to you for final thoughts.
Well, the most important thing is what you just said, Joseph, is I wish that people could take those few minutes. We've got such strong bipartisan support for the FIGHT Act, but we also have some powerful interests that are pushing against that. And in my opinion, there's just no real justification for that. I don't think you could get any of our voters to sit down there and ask their please explain to me what it is that you're against the FIGHT Act about. And I don't think they would be able to come up with anything. So they need to hear from people that they support the FIGHT Act, that this is important to them, both for the animal disease reasons, the cruelty that you talked about, but also the very real potential that cockfighting has to be that patient zero, to start a pandemic that could absolutely devastate us, that would make COVID just look like a birthday party in comparison. And all of that just for this horrible industry, cockfighting, this exercise in sadism. There's no excuse for any of it. And so if we can just get people to take those few minutes to contact their legislators, it could make all the difference.
All right, Dr. Poole, thank you so much. Dr. Keene, thank you as well. And thank you to our audience. This has been an in-depth episode for sure.
Josie, one more thing. I checked. Confabulation is a word. It is a word. And it means a memory error that creates false memories, which I think my wife suffers from that. So,
well, thank you. I'm glad at least it was a word, even though I used it incorrectly. I definitely malapropped that one. But all right, good. I'm half right. I'll take that. Take that. That's more than I do most of the time. So, but the bottom line of it is, we can do something. We can make a difference. And helping to support the FIGHT Act is one way you can make a difference today. And thank you for listening to the show.
Please be sure to subscribe so you don't miss an episode, and follow Animal Wellness Action on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and LinkedIn. To stay current with all of our news and information, and to take action to help animals, sign up at animalwellnessaction.org. Until next time, remember that helping animals helps us all.